The study of ecology involves looking at the way organisms interact with each other and their environment. Make sure you identify the key words throughout this video and record them on your paper notes. Organisms are divided into two categories based on how they obtain energy. Some organisms are able to absorb energy from the sun through a process called photosynthesis. They are known as autotrophs, or producers, because they produce food. The prefix auto means self, and the suffix troph means to obtain energy from food. So, autotroph means that organisms are able to obtain energy from food that they make themselves. Plants and some bacteria are able to do this because they have a pigment called chlorophyll that absorbs light energy. Your first keyword is organisms. Other organisms are unable to photosynthesize, and they must obtain their energy from consuming other organisms. They are known as heterotrophs, or consumers, because they consume food. The prefix hetero means different, so heterotroph means to obtain energy from a different source. There are 5 types of consumers. The first type is herbivore. Herbivores eat only plants. The prefix herb means plant. Herbivores have flat, sturdy teeth for grinding and chewing vegetation. The next type of consumer is carnivore. Carnivores eat only animals. The prefix carn means meat. Carnivores have sharp, pointed teeth for hunting prey and tearing into the meat. Omnivore is the third type of consumer. Omnivores eat both plants and animals. You are an omnivore. You have a mix of pointed and flat teeth that are perfect for a mixed diet of plants and animals. Another type of consumer is scavenger. Scavengers eat leftover food that other organisms discard. These organisms have special bacteria in their digestive tract that allow them to eat rotting food sources without getting sick. Vultures are great examples of scavengers. The last type of consumer is decomposer. Decomposers are organisms like fungi, earthworms, and bacteria that break down decaying material and return the nutrients to the soil. Organisms that interact as consumers can be organized into simple food chains. We will use this food chain as an example. Your second keyword is interact. Energy moves in the direction of the consumer. As you follow the arrow up the food chain, the amount of available energy changes. This is called a trophic level. A really important concept that many students have difficulty remembering is that the sun is the original source of all energy on Earth. The energy that your body is able to get by digesting the cereal you had for breakfast came from the oats and the wheat that were harvested to make the cereal. The oats and the wheat absorbed that energy from the sun. Producers are considered the first trophic level, or the first organism in a food chain. By the process of photosynthesis, the strawberries and all other plants are able to store energy in glucose molecules. Plants use this stored glucose to continue growing and developing. The next organism in a food chain is called a primary consumer. Primary means first. This is the second trophic level, but the first level of consumers. The organisms that are found on this level are either herbivores or omnivores. Depending on what they eat, many organisms can occupy multiple levels of the food chain. Here, the rat can be considered a primary or a secondary consumer. Secondary consumers are organisms that consume a primary consumer. They are the third trophic level, or the third level away from the sun. Secondary consumers must be carnivores or omnivores. Your third keyword is with. Tertiary consumers are considered the top of the food chain, or apex species. These organisms consume secondary consumers, so they are usually carnivorous predators. However, they can be omnivores, like humans and bears. The trophic levels on our food chain stop here, but they can continue on to quaternary consumers. However, there are usually no more than 4 trophic levels because the amount of available energy at these levels would be too small to sustain life. Scavengers and decomposers are still part of the food chain, but they do not occupy a trophic level. Decomposers, however, have an important role of returning nutrients to the soil. Plants need these nutrients to grow, so without decomposers, the rest of the food chain would not exist. Your fourth keyword is each. In order to use the energy that is transferred along the food chain, all of the organisms, including the producer, transform glucose into a usable form of energy with the process of cellular respiration. You will learn more about cellular respiration in the next unit. It is the opposite process of photosynthesis. Food chains usually overlap within an ecosystem. We use diagrams called food webs to show that certain organisms can occupy multiple trophic levels, depending on what they consume. Your fifth keyword is other. We also use food chains to create diagrams called energy pyramids. Energy pyramids illustrate the transfer of energy between each trophic level. As you go up the pyramid, the amount of energy decreases because you are getting further away from the sun. Energy pyramids also illustrate something called biomass, which is the total mass of organisms or the total amount of organisms at each level. As you travel up the pyramid, biomass also decreases. It takes a large number of producers to provide enough energy to sustain a smaller number of primary consumers, and so on. There are fewer organisms at the top of the pyramid than there are on every other level. There are multiple ways that organisms can interact with each other and their environments. One way is predation. Predation is when an organism kills another organism for food. If an organism kills for another reason, it is not considered predation. Predators are usually secondary and tertiary consumers, filling the top spots on food chains. Prey, the organisms that they kill for food, are usually primary or secondary consumers and are a weaker species. Your sixth keyword is and. Another interaction is called competition. Competition can exist when organisms are fighting over a limited resource. This could be many things. Some examples of resources that can be limited in an ecosystem are food, water, space, and mates. Competitors are usually from the same species, or a similar species occupying the same trophic level. In addition to the resources I just mentioned, there are other factors that can limit the size of a population of organisms. Factors like weather, disease, predators, and natural catastrophes can also affect population size. On your paper, please make sure to write down at least 5 of these limiting factors. The largest population that an area can support is called its carrying capacity. The carrying capacity is determined by the limiting factors in that environment. Organisms can also interact in beneficial ways. When at least one organism benefits from the interaction, it is called symbiosis. Symbiotic species have a close relationship because they have evolved together in the same environment. Your seventh keyword is the. There are 3 types of symbiosis. The first is called mutualism. Mutualistic relationships benefit both organisms involved. A great example of mutualism is the relationship between bumblebees and flowers. The bees eat nectar and help the flowers pollinate at the same time. The next type of symbiosis is commensalism. Commensalism is the least common symbiotic relationship, but it does exist some places in nature. Commensalism is when one species benefits and the other is indifferent. It is neither helped nor harmed. The egret and the elephant is an example of commensalism. Elephants stir up insects as they walk through the vegetation. The egret birds follow the herds to feast on these bugs. The last type of symbiosis is parasitism. Parasitism is a relationship where one organism, the parasite, benefits, and the other, the host, is harmed. An example of parasitism that I'm sure you are familiar with is the relationship between mosquitoes and mammals. The mosquitoes get nutrients from mammalian blood, while the mammal is left with an itchy bite that could be infected. Your final keyword is environment.